Hello, and welcome back to the You're Doing Great Mom podcast. This is episode 13.
Knowing from that first difficult birth that I had that this cannot be it. This cannot be this cannot be the way that we bring life into the world. This incredibly, let's face it, spiritual process of bringing life, creation into the world cannot be met in this clinical, cold, brushed under the carpet, next please way of being. It's almost through a complete outsider's perspective and being pushed away so far that brought me to thinking and trying to learn more about the dignity and the honouring and respect that must come back to this, that has to come back to this, because it just isn't right. It just doesn't feel good. It just doesn't make me feel alive. And surely birth and menstruation, it's the fertility cycle. It's the cycle of life. It's the fertility in its biggest perspective is about how much life we allow into our bodies. And so that's a little bit about my own story.
I'm Dr. Marianne Shiozawa, and you're going to love this one. Mandy Adams is my guest today. I am convinced that the information Mandy shares on this episode has the potential to change the world. Yes, it's that powerful. For a while now, since the age of about 28, I have been very passionate about women's health, women's self-esteem issues, women's self-development, empowerment, reproductive health, and the dynamics of men and their relationships with women. So when I was single, young, living in New York, I read a lot of books to teach me these things. I also was very involved in taking seminars at the Mama Gina's School of Womanly Arts, created and run by Regina Thomaschauer, who I've mentioned before in past episodes. These courses, seminars, and books over the years have helped form who I am as a woman and now as a mother and a wife. I wish I had met Mandy Adams, my guest today, when I was younger, because it would have added even more education for me about the topics related to womanhood. Mandy is an educator who teaches the core principle, essential information about the essence of being a female. And these teachings impact girls and women as well as boys and men globally, because it's all a part of us in some way or another. To make it very simple, it's the menstrual cycle. You have to listen to this. And I recommend that you dedicate 100% of your attention just listening, because that's how important I think it is. Take it all in, and then keep learning about it, and then share it. You're going to want to. This is powerful enough to impact the world on an enormously positive level. Listen to the whole thing up to the end so you can find out how to reach out to Mandy. Enjoy. I'm so excited to have Mandy with me. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, you're welcome. It's lovely to speak to you, Marianne.
So tell me what you do, basically, and how you got into it, and how, if it was related to in becoming a mother. That really interests me.
Oh, that's a fantastic question. And I am a menstruality educator. My background is actually in Steiner education, so I come from a teaching background. And when I had my second son, I experienced a normal birth, and I had an awakening experience. I experienced the incredible flood of oxytocin that normal birth brings. And it was something which I was so surprised, having had a managed birth for my first son. I had to go in to hospital, having had an overdue and long labour, and went through having all manner of intervention, bar a C-section. And came out of that first birthing experience with my first son, recognizing that this is what most women experience. This is what my friends had experienced, and this was coming into the world of parenting with a damaged pelvic floor, difficulties in feeding my son. He had a pneumothorax when he was born, and there was separation at the beginning, and there was a fractious start to our my first experience of becoming a mother. And that led me into finding out about birth. It led me into inquiring about birth. It led me into studying, training about birth. And when it came to having my second son, I was then teaching birth rehearsal courses. And in that experience of normal birth, I was experiencing this euphoria, this elation, and wondered why I hadn't heard this before. I hadn't read about this. I hadn't had stories told to me about this. I hadn't been told that this experience existed. And so after his birth, I set about looking for teachers, looking for women that could teach me about how could birth be this rite of passage? How could birth exist as something which could completely and profoundly change my outlook on life and give me such a radical, different experience from that of birthing my first son? That it felt that life was very different for me. I could never go back to being the person that I was before, because now suddenly I had been almost initiated into a new set of understanding myself as a woman. I felt that if I had given birth normally, that now I could somehow face anything in the world. I had this new sense of courage within me.
Mm. It's so true. We never get told about that euphoria, that rush of oxytocin. I experienced the same thing, and I think that a lot of women do, and yet we don't, I didn't know about it. I had no idea that this was going to happen.
Right. Yeah. And this is it, Marianne. And so once that had been a body-based experience for me, I set upon looking for teachers and found various teachers and studied with women around the world that were teaching about birth as being a rite of passage, but women that were also linking this into the menstrual cycle, linking this into the preparation that we have every month through our menstruality to prepare us for this birth experience. And that I heard from one of my teachers, Alexandra Pope, that menstruality as a definition was this female life arc process that was leading us month by month to come to the altar, if you like, of birth, to be able to have solid ground, to have found our voice, to be prepared for this opening experience. And that each month at menstruation, we had an opportunity to also access that oxytocin that I had experienced at birth. And so I was completely and utterly hooked and amazed to hear this and wanted to know more. And how can I go back to that feeling? How can I tap in to more of that, which is what led me into doing the work which I'm now offering.
Mm. Yeah, that's great. And what was your third birth like?
Well, then Samson, who he's now 2, when I chose how I was going to have this baby, and I was now in my 40s, there was opposition. There was opposition from the medical profession that now, as an older parent, that I would need to be induced on or before my due date. This was the initial booking in phase. My husband and I were led to a consultant, and the consultant, within the 5 minutes that we were there, within that 5-minute meeting, said, because of your age, 17 times. And we responded with, well, the holistic picture of my health and the fact that I'd had a child only a couple of years previously didn't show that it was necessary to have an induction, and that we would respectfully decline that. And I got into a dialogue with the midwives and got into a dialogue with the head midwife of the hospital here in Cornwall at Trelisk. And she came to my home and we discussed how it could be that I could have a normal home birth, but with the next level, I wanted to birth alone. I wanted to have that experience of having the medical professionals here, but that I would be left to birth alone upstairs in what is now his bedroom with the birthing pool. My husband would be present but outside of the room, because I felt very confident that this was going to be my last child, and that I really wanted to fully feel in my body each of the stages of labour, and I wanted to be left alone in order to do that, and that I would acknowledge them if I needed them, and of course wouldn't go against any medical advice that was needed for the safety of my child or I. And the head midwife agreed to it. And so when it came to Samson's birth, two midwives were downstairs eating macaroons and drinking from my grandmother's bone china.
Nice.
And my husband was in the room next door. And when Samson was crowning and coming into the world, they just came and knocked on the door and said, we can hear that the birth is progressing. Is there anything that you need? And at that moment that they opened the door, I pulled Samson into the world and into the water. And so there was there was a euphoria and a congratulations, and it was very beautiful, and it was something which I felt I really needed to experience for myself, that I could find my own voice within a culture which is very much about us, often encouraged not to take responsibility and encouraged to follow the lead of others. That I wanted to feel that I could have my own voice and have my own birth in the way that I wanted to experience it, within the safety of the setting of the medical profession, and I was allowed, and it was beautiful, really beautiful.
I have chills the whole time you've been telling this story. My skin is just crawling with these amazing chills. That is such a beautiful story. And for you to, with all of the obstacles against you, I mean, just there, well, these are obstacles that you didn't see, but that the experts and the very influential to most people, the medical profession, those were put on, or they tried to put that on you. And just to be able to say thank you, respectfully declining, and knowing that this is what you wanted, this is what you needed to experience, that is so, I have no words. Yeah, I love that you had that experience, because that's what's possible. Yeah, go ahead.
I feel that it is this development of finding our own voice, which is what the menstruality work is about. For me, the menstruality work is about finding our own inner guidance and trusting that voice enough that when it matters in our life, we can stand in our own truth. That we can, in our lifetime now, I mean, we really are fortunate as Western women. We, like many other women around the world still, we don't actually face the consequence of dying, literally being persecuted and killed for speaking what our needs are. And although we may feel that as a really strong force of opposition against us, I feel very privileged that I have the courage and the support in my family and my husband and people around me to be able to choose what I know is right for me based out of what I'm experiencing in my body, and also the consequences of that in the future. Because I know from having had a highly managed first birth, then out of that comes a very fractious baby and a very difficult start. And so by the third child, I didn't even want to risk that for my other two sons, that there would be a long period that I would have to be separate from them. And so it's coming, I think, from an approach of really trusting what's right for us. And hence the work that I'm standing in is allowing women to find their own unique voice. And the more that we stand in that as individuals, then we become this collective awakened force of the feminine.
Yeah. And that is I truly believe that with that force, it can change the world.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So tell me, what's interesting is, for me, is a lot of the history or people's experiences in their past. What was it like for you growing up? Like, how did your mother or your education tell you about menstruation? You know, was it like for me, my parents didn't tell, my mother didn't really, she didn't know. She had no idea. It's just like, okay, you get your period at one point. And that's basically it. I mean, I vaguely remember her saying, oh, good for you, and like a hug sort of thing when I first got my period. But that's pretty much it. And then it was very, in school, I can't even remember what they taught us, but I know that we had that kind of that day of learning about the fact that we get our period every month. But other than that, really, there was just almost no education, and definitely nothing remotely close to what you are teaching. So I'm just curious, what was it like for you growing up?
Yeah, it was very similar to what you've described. I grew up with just my mother, my brother, and my sister, and so my father wasn't present. And interestingly, I come from a long line of midwives, and my mum wasn't a practicing midwife, nor was her mother, but my great grandmother, and all the way back in this town that I live in Hale, in Cornwall, were the community midwives here. And so, interestingly, when it got to my mum and to my grandmother, they chose not to practice because already at that point, midwifery was not able to be practiced in a way which was empowering the women and not allowing birth to happen as all my great grannies had encouraged these women to birth as. And so my grandmother stepped out of that. She also had 9 children, and so she still stayed connected to the midwifery profession, but she used to starch all the uniforms and take care of them in that way. And same for my mother. My mum was much more of a service to that, cooking the meals and being able to help the community and people in their own homes. And so when I had my menstruation, also it was looked over. There was a packet of sanitary towels which were left in the wardrobe. I had an older sister who was already menstruating, and it was considered more of an inconvenience than a celebration in any way of becoming a fertile cyclical woman.
Exactly.
And yes, and then in the school, we had a talk from Lillette's, the sanitary product company. It was a sponsored talk, and so clearly they were there to sell their products. And I recognized that when I gave birth to my first son, the imagery that I had in my mind, so this was 9 years ago, was that same imagery that I'd been taught back at that lesson, which was the I think it's called the medial plane section of the inside of a woman's body, showing how to insert the tampon. And that's the amount of education that I had taking into the birth of my first son was from the Lillette's people. That was it. So I had no education around what was actually happening inside of my body, and far less education about how that could become a deep resource for me. It was shrouded in silence, which is clearly an indication that there is some shame there, and this secrecy and taboo. Again, understanding that taboo is a Polynesian word which means hidden, secret, shameful, and in some translations it actually means menstruation. And so this knowing from that first difficult birth that I had that this cannot be it. This cannot be this cannot be the way that we bring life into the world. This incredibly, let's face it, spiritual process of bringing life, creation into the world cannot be met in this clinical, cold, brushed under the carpet, next please way of being. It's almost through a complete outsider's perspective and being pushed away so far that brought me to thinking and trying to learn more about the dignity and the honoring and respect that must come back to this, that has to come back to this, because it just isn't right. It just doesn't feel good. It just doesn't make me feel alive. And
Mm-hmm.
surely birth and menstruation it's the fertility cycle. It's the cycle of life. It's the fertility in its biggest perspective is about how much life we allow into our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, that's a little bit about my own story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just to, I try to imagine when, if the education, and if mothers had the knowledge and the wisdom to be able to share and teach our children, both men and boys and girls, if they knew that, because now the taboo, as you say, it's related to not only menstruation and the way their bodies change, it's also the body parts. I remember I just had this experience. I was with some kids, with my children. They were over, and they I can't remember how we got into it, but I asked, there was like a couple boys and there was like their sisters over, and I can't remember why we got into it, but they were talking about it or something. And then I said, well, cause they said, oh, my penis or something like that. And then I just started, I don't know, I perked and I turned my head. I was like, oh, I wonder why they're talking about this. I was like, yeah, well, do you know what your privates are? And what are they called again? And he's like, penis. And then I said, do you know what the girls' parts are? And they had the bits. They had no proper terminology. And they said, oh, the bits. And I was like, see, that's what I'm talking about. The kids are not told, and I don't understand why there's such a pejorative or such a taboo. It's a taboo culture where from the get-go, when a child is 3, 4, 5 years old and they're not able to know what the proper name is of the body parts. And that goes into when the girls and the boys start to change into puberty. And then when the girl has her first period, or even before she has her first period and starts menstruating, to not know and to not anticipate what is about to happen to their bodies. So I just imagine, what would the world be like? What would even in just this Western culture, if we could transform that education and teach the children what is actually going on in their bodies. So much would come out of that. So much goodness would come out of that.
I absolutely agree, Marianne, and I really hear what you're bringing there, and it's so vital that we, as women and as men and women, as human beings, look at these areas, all areas in our lives where there is secrecy, where there is silence, where there is secret keeping, that there is power there. This is why it's silenced. This is why. When we look back through history and we live in a patriarchal culture, that in order to hold power, then certain aspects of society are silenced. And in particular for us as women and for young girls, if we can, if a culture can cut our even ability to name what's going on in our body and to distance ourselves so much from our pelvis, then we've already, in many ways, won. We've already cut that female off from her own knowing, from her own understanding, because already there is shame there. Don't even want to look there, and that's what we see in the birthing room. That's what we see, as women that feel that it's when they have their children that they have to make a connection to this part of the body. Mm-hmm. And prior to that, there is so much shame. Don't even want to talk about down there, and that we as women don't even have names. We don't name the vulva, the vagina, but we would rather have kind of pet names for her, as opposed to really proudly naming our body parts. And so that we as individuals are reclaiming that what has been held in secrecy and shame and taboo. And yes, in the future, our education will look very different because that we now, as the adults, are restoring this awareness.
Yeah, yeah. So if you can explain a little bit about because whoever's listening and really hasn't even looked at the menstrual cycle in the way that you're teaching, it's absolutely fascinating. I started reading about it and learning about it, about our bodies, truly the wisdom of our cycles and our bodies through Christiane Northrup and her book, Women's Bodies, Women's Wisdom. And it was like this huge aha moment, this huge light bulb. It just was like, oh my gosh, this just so makes sense. And I think if all women listened to what you're teaching or read Christiane Northrup's book, it would be like that for women. Do you know what I mean? It's just so makes sense to us.
And there is absolutely right. And there's a whole list of other books. Her book is listed that I have read, and I heartily recommend to women. It's on the resources page of my website. Women could read from another perspective. They could read Vagina, Naomi Stedland, and just understanding the capacity of the nervous system in our pelvis and the ability that we have as women that we have closed ourselves to, or perhaps even looking at Jane Hardwicke Collins' work, or Alexandra Pope's work, or Uma Dinsmore Tully's work. Each of these women, these teachers, they are bringing us their lifetime of work in gathering this information and making it available to us, printing this awareness for us to read as women. And the more that we can be drawn to that work that speaks to us, because different authors come to us at different times in our lives, don't they, that we feel really drawn to, then we start to awaken this interest of what is there, what more is there to me that I haven't even tapped into. And so yes, for the menstrual side of things, for the menstrual cycle, then what we're really tapping into is an ancestral knowing. It's an ancestral knowing that prior to 6,000 years ago, prior to our patriarchal masculine linear way of thinking, which is what's governing our world at this moment, we had thousands of years of living by this cyclical nature. And it's by restoring this awareness in our own bodies, why we really are blessed as women, that we are drawn back to this cyclical nature every single month. And whether we are conscious of it moving through our bodies or not, it's governing us, it's there. And so it can become a very body-based mindfulness practice for a woman to access her femininity and her masculinity and her cyclical knowing. And so the teachings of menstruality are what I like to imagine that we would have in our tribal time. So wherever we have come from on the earth, we all come from an indigenous culture. Each and every human being has a long line behind us. And our indigenous culture that we each have would have had these teachings. And these teachings are understanding the fertility cycle. And we see the fertility cycle in every aspect of everything in nature. And it is this growing, full bloom, harvest, and decay. It's this cyclical nature that we see in all living things. We see it in the life cycle of ourselves as human beings. We see it in the life cycle of a rose, of a fruit coming onto a tree, of all living beings on the planet.
And the moon. My
Yes.
son,
Yes.
who's 8, and he is absolutely obsessed with space and the moon and the
Yes.
earth and the physics behind everything. And we just got him a telescope for his birthday a few months ago. And if like in London, you can't really see a really clear sky, especially if there's a lot of clouds. And if there's a clear sky, because every single day it's, Mommy, is it going to be a clear sky? And he'll look out and look up and see if they can find the moon. And he is tapped into the moon's cycle. It's just fascinating, So that in and of itself it's like instinctively we understand this,
Yeah.
and boys, my son is really starting to learn about the moon cycle. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
And that's a very tangible way that we can see it. And so we're speaking today just after the full moon last night.
Oh,
And
right.
so the full moon is our in our bodies, that could be likened to ovulation. That is the fertility of our body. That is when we are at our full capacity. And at the opposite end of that is the dark moon or the new moon, when there's no moon. And that is likened in our bodies to menstruation. That is then the inner seasonal. We can consider it as our inner winter. And we can consider that the full moon or the ovulation, the high energy, is our inner summer. And in between those two poles, when we're coming around to pre-ovulation, that could be likened to inner spring. And as we're coming around to the new moon or no moon and the waning moon, this can be likened to, in the premenstruum, to our inner autumn. And when we see that those seasonal energies, which is a really lovely way to look at it, because we can see this growing energy coming around to our inner summer at ovulation, and then the declining energy, which takes us around to menstruation, that we have two clear poles of energy, which we could say is a growing energy towards ovulation, or a via positiva energy. And then as we come around after that egg has been released, and if it's not met and fertilized, then we move around to the declining energy of moving around to autumn and to winter, which could be seen as the via negativa, and so also could be viewed as the masculine arc of energy and the feminine arc of energy that's moving through our female bodies every month in order to enable menstruation, able to enable fertility. And in the male body, they are also experiencing this. And the people that live in our household that are male are under the influence of our menstrual cycle. And so they are also experiencing those same cycles that we are in our bodies, because they're living in proximity to us.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Mm.
And the positivity, the first part of the arc is like I read that the estrogen is embodies the essence of positivity. It's about embracing and welcoming. Women are more receptive to creating relationships and wanting to be around people. And there's like a nice softness to it, or to her, so to speak. She's more, things are not going to bother her as much. The stress is handled a lot with more ease and joy and pleasure and fun.
In its balanced state, yes, yes.
Okay,
In its
that's the key
balanced
word,
state,
right?
yes. And that you're talking really beautifully about that first arc of our cycle. And also, when you're speaking, then it's really poignant to note that that is the arc in our culture where women are accepted. And so that is our masculine arc. So that masculine arc of energy, where the estrogen is rising, where we often feel happier in ourselves because it's where we're accepted in the world, because then we are productive and we're surging forwards. We can be superwoman. We can get absolutely everything on our list done, plus an extra list, and then another list before we go to bed, because there's just this amazing surge of life force which is moving through us, because the energy is growing, the energy is creating that fertile egg in the body. And you're thinking of it back to the to the full moon, that we are rising in our life force, and so the energy gets to a peak, and all is well. But what happens in our cycle, and because we're not met in the other half of our cycle in our culture, and that this is what we're endeavoring to do now with our menstruality, but also we see this in the world surrounding us, that once that egg has not been met, not been fertilized, then there's a decline in energy. And so as women, this is why why women's magazines are so full of all the things that we can do to bring our energy back up, all the things that we can do to products that we can buy to make us look like we've slept more, or to take away the wrinkles, or to bring less stress and so on, is because then once we come around to that inner autumn, inner winter, where the energy is now falling, then we are, as women, we try to override that. Certainly all my life, before I had learned about this menstruality awareness, and I only came to this in my 40s, it was as if I had continued my life trying to extend that summer arc, trying at all costs, even though I wasn't feeling like it, to plow on regardless, and to keep up that productivity and to keep going, even though my energy levels were naturally, as seasonal nature and cyclical nature does, was declining, and inviting me to draw more inwardly, to listen to my inner guidance, to take care of myself, to nurture myself, and to slow down and start looking at what I had created in that first arc of my cycle. Is that what I want? And then to be able to let that go, to come back into that again, almost to build a spiral, one on top of the other, so that I am in a creative partnership, as opposed to quite a destructive trampling over everything that my body was feeling and sensing regardless, to the point now where we see the rise in the suppression of menstruation, that young girls are encouraged to have one bleed and then suppress that with the implants and with the various forms of suppression that are available to young girls today, so that they can continue at all costs in that half of the cycle, which is the linear, forward driving, positive, masculine arc of our cycle. And when we come to that opposite arc, so when we come to autumn and winter, which gets such a bad rap, this is the part where we really receive that deep rest, the deep inner knowing, the ability to completely let go. It's the same energy that we experience in physically birthing our children, that when we do let go at the other half of the cycle, to listen to what we need, to nurture ourselves, to make good food, to take the time that we need to allow our bodies to rest and repair and release menstruation. And what menstruation, of course, is doing is allowing the body to relieve itself of any held tension, physically, emotionally, and mentally, and to let go of toxins that have been built up and stored within the physical body. When that release happens at menstruation, when we allow it to happen, then there's an incredible process which can happen. And this is what our ancient ancestors have pointed to as a spiritual practice for women, because each month at menstruation we have the opportunity to access levels of oxytocin in the same way that we do after normal birth. And so, having heard that myself from my teachers, and there was a fury that I felt at first, and an absolute rage of, well, why haven't I been told that for the last 25 years of bleeding? Why have I been encouraged to suppress that, to carry on regardless, like the adverts tell us to wear white trousers, go skydiving, and do more during our menstruation, even, override that to the point of it completely going against the body's needs. And so when we truly experience a menstruation where we feel those levels of oxytocin and we actually feel renewed, then comes this sense of trusting our bodies, trusting this inner guidance that's working us from our menarche all the way through to our menopause, so that when our menopause happens, we feel that we can embody this body-based knowing that we've been practicing throughout our menstruating years. And it's then that in our old culture, we would have stepped into our work. It was then that women, rather than then being brushed aside as no longer part of society, it was in our 50s, in our 45 to 55, coming through perimenopause to menopause, that women then started inhabiting this inner guidance, this truth speaking, this absolutely knowing what needs to happen now and standing in that as their work, as their inner calling. And that's what the menstrual cycle is encouraging us to come back to each and every cycle. And I can say from my own experience that once you've given yourself that 1%, if you like, of rest at menstruation, that 1% of listening to what your body needs, moving at the pace of liminality, of listening to what you need, meeting those needs, and then meeting the needs of your family and those that are around you, but coming back home to yourself once a month, then it becomes something which is so precious. It's almost as if there's a retreat that you can look to in your diary each month that then prevents the yearly holiday planning where you're going to store everything up until you get on holiday and then probably get ill because you've stored it all up until then. But that there could be this sustainable practice that a woman could take each month to nurture herself, and particularly as mothers that are the caregivers, as the families, that girls and boys could grow up watching their mothers take care of themselves. And so that becomes the beginning teaching that they carry into their lives, that they see that mother, literally their mother, and the earth, therefore, that they stand upon, is not able to just completely and utterly give at all costs, because she will be depleted and she will be at some point reactive and she will explode and she will speak in a way which she doesn't want to speak, because that's what happens at the premenstruum, because there's no reprieve, there's no gap, there's no space to renew. But if we were to reclaim this ancient practice of menstruality awareness, then we as women could start to stand in our inner knowing. And what I've experienced with my 3 sons is that when I take that time at menstruation, and it began as an hour, and then it turned into a day. Now it's 2 days, and if I could, I would have 5 days. But it is this time that I look forward to once a month, that I negotiate with my husband, and he takes time during my ovulation, and he will go and have time apart from the children on that weekend. And during my weekend, I literally take care of myself. And what a feeling that is for somebody who is so deeply responsible for my family, and it seemed in my life for everyone and everything, that I have come to this practice of taking care of myself and deeply resting, that when I come out of that space, I have this sense of meeting my children and my husband and those that I work with like a child again. I feel completely energized. I feel as if I have had a secret break bestowed upon me, as if I have received a hug from the earth to say thank you, thank you for replenishing yourself and not operating in this unconscious, frazzled, doing, unsustainable mode, which I am unconsciously bringing to my family. And as a mother of 3 sons, I feel committed that they need to see a woman who is able to restore her energy and not dependent on others for that I am taking responsibility to do that for myself.
Oh. I have to take that all in. That is just, oh my gosh. And every single woman who listens to this and who you speak to and share this is going to say, oh my God, when I do that, and not that they knowingly do, but there are a lot of us that get to that point where we have to, otherwise we will absolutely crack. And we have to take, there is that energy, that force, when we have to go internally. We have to listen to our needs and to have that groundedness with the earth, and to address and to nurture ourselves. It's women, we do that naturally, but they don't even know, most women just don't realize, like, why is it? And bridging that gap to let women learn about this from this podcast episode, or what you're teaching, it makes so much sense, because that feeling that you described, where when you get back after your 1 or 2 day break, actually, in fact, I was wondering, do you actually go away somewhere, or do you just...
Well, this is the journey of finding what it is for you this is why I love having this conversation with as many women as possible, because then I hear how a woman in her set of circumstances in her life negotiates that, because it's an ongoing practice. And so I'm a mother of 3 children. And so for me, I have in the past gone away. I've gone to a friend's wagon on her field, and I've had the wood burner, and I've taken what I've needed to just go there and to rest and to draw and to dream and to just move at the pace of my body. But in later times, more recently, that's felt like too much of an effort. That's felt like I'm resentful before I even get there, that I've got to pack to do it. That's another thing to have to do. And so what my practice is right now is that I actually have a pop-up red tent. And it's in my porch, and I'm fortunate. I live in Cornwall. I have a long garden, and so when the call comes that I need to now go and be with myself, then I go and I camp at the bottom of the garden, and I just have what I need in that space to just sleep. And I feel this absolute, I need to just lie on the earth. That's what I need. And I need to feel that I'm not listening to traffic. I want to hear the sea. I want to hear birds. And that's what I'm needing at this point. Prior to that, I've taken myself just into our bedroom and created my own space in the bedroom. That's then I'm not going to be disturbed in that area. But then that turned into hearing then my husband looking after the children, and then my need to kind of feel that I want to go and partake in that conversation or do it a little bit different. And so then I can't quite separate. And so this is a journey for each woman to take, and recognizing that at the beginning, my goodness, the struggle that I had, the year it took me to even ask. And I mean, the fact that I had to ask says a lot about my personality, that I felt I needed to ask my husband, can I do this? As opposed to claiming it, and knowing that, what woman listening to this doesn't want to take that time. What one of us isn't screaming for that time, to literally have permission to be with ourselves. And so the journey it takes to even claim that, because I felt much more comfortable saying that I can go off on a retreat. I can go off and do a meditation retreat for the weekend or a yoga retreat, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about actually doing nothing but what my body asks of me. So they might be cooking the food that I like to eat, not what I'm cooking for my family or that my husband likes. It's a practice of deeply listening to our own body's needs. And this is something which we each have to negotiate, have to find our way into finding, because at the beginning, the critic that we meet at premenstruum, so this part of our cycle in the feminine arc of our cycle isn't easy. It's held within that half of the cycle, is all these thousands of years of suppression, is all these thousands of years of voicing that tell us not to do that, and that chide us now, not externally, hopefully, but internally, telling us, well, who are you to take that time? Surely there's more productive things that you could be doing. There's all this inner dialogue that goes on to just allow that to happen, let alone facing the shadow which comes, because that's another aspect of my work. I'm a basic shadow work facilitator, and the shadow work model is allowing us to look at the parts of ourselves we have split off, the parts of ourselves which we haven't stood in during the month. And so that inner critic then comes up premenstrually and reviews what's happened in the first half of the cycle. And our individual inner critics are often bringing us very crucial teachings, but they bring it to us in words which are very cutting and very destabilizing. And meeting that inner critic. We need support in order to do that. We need other women that are also reclaiming this so that we can have these conversations, so that we can hear that, yes, I felt really ashamed at just taking care of myself. Or that I found that I couldn't. I found when it came to it, there was still the dishwasher that needed emptying, or all the laundry that needed folding, or all those emails that needed responded to. And I fell into doing. As my default setting, and how hard it is to just be. And so therefore, this practice of being, it needs to come gradually. It needs to come gradually so that we can hold it. And that the more that we practice it, the more that we create that safety and holding for ourselves to meet this force of the feminine, because she is a force. And she is the truth speaker, and she is the part of us in our premenstrual where we look at the world externally and we feel often powerless to make a change. We look at our own world in our family and in our work settings and in our life that we've created, and often feel that we see things that we should have spoken up about and we chose not to, and we kept quiet. And now comes this truth speaking energy at the premenstruum that often lets that out in a less than gentle way, and then we feel regretful that we've done it in that way.
Also known as bitch.
Yes, absolutely. And another of my teachers, and Susan Weed, calls premenstrual tension. What is the word she says it? PMS, patriarchal mindset.
Oh wow.
Need to destabilize from, that we need to now come away from. And that's why we as women also fear this half of our cycle. It's not easy to stand in our menstruality. It's not easy to claim something which so clearly isn't valued in the world, so clearly is in opposition to everything that our culture stands for. Because when we drop into the feminine arc of our cycle, we're not consumers, and we're not buyers, and we're not doers, and we're not productive. We are resting, fertile, cyclical women that are tapping into our own creative life force. And when we tap into that, we start to hear our own unique inner guidance. And that unique inner guidance is the part which all mystical teachers the world over are guiding us towards. Every world religion is guiding us towards that own inner teaching. And that inner teaching for women can be accessed, and there's many paths to it. But for me, mine has come through the body and through the menstrual cycle. That once we do start to listen to that inner guide, then our lives change and things have to shift. And that's a fearful place, because most of us are quite comfortable in the lives that we've created, and there's some discomfort that we feel from time to time, but we manage to negotiate that. But when we really drop into this truth speaking aspect of renewable energy, which is our deepening connection to the earth, there comes a sense of responsibility, and there comes a sense, and I think it happens more so for us as women as we pass through our life arc and come to perimenopause and to menopause, that we, and especially then as mothers, because we look at our children and think, this is our opportunity now in the next 20, 30 years, if we're lucky enough to have that time on earth. What can we do? How can we, it makes me cry, but how can we as individuals stand up? And that's what the menstrual cycle gives us the courage to do, because we get the courage to face our own inner critic. And if we can face her, then we can face all the criticism that will come to us externally in the world around us.
Absolutely. It really is the power and the force to shift and transform the world, really, because when we look at the masculine patriarchal culture that we've been living in for thousands of years, we're just taught, and almost the learning and the training that is downloaded into our nervous systems through societal influences in the culture from the patriarchy. It's so it's causing us to go so against in that opposition, and we just women just have no idea how, and men have no idea. And I was thinking about your boys and other young boys like my son. I'm picturing when they start dating women, start dating girls at age 14, 15, 16, they're going to know so much, not only from their knowledge and understanding on a like logical level, a conceptual level. They've lived with you. They've seen your cycles. They know what a tuned in, connected, and expansive, vital woman is. They know what it's like to live with that. And so when they start to date these girls who have no idea, I mean, I'm just going to assume that each girl that they meet and want to date, it's going to be them who where the girl's going to be all moody and quote unquote bitchy to them, and then I can just picture my son go, why don't you just go and, I mean, he's going to say things like, he's going to nurture her.
Let me run you a bath.
Yeah, exactly. He will nurture her. And, your boys and my son, they're going to be, and boys who learn about this and who know how to elevate and keep that woman elevated. They're going to be just, it's like that. So such a beautiful rhythmic dance that the boy and the girl, the man and the woman is going to be able to experience and explore. And, just that kind of evolution that takes place from family to family, generation to generation. It's world transformative.
It's so true, Marianne, and also what we are longing for as women in our own relationships, in our own intimate relationships with our husbands and our partners. What we are calling for at that most fundamental level is that, can you hold me in that energy? Can you allow me to be in that place where I can see so much and feel often helpless, or that I feel I need to say this, and that they can hold that, knowing that it's not personal, knowing that it's not against them, knowing that in no way is it demasculizing them, but that they can hold in their presence and look us in the eyes and give us that hug that we need to be able to melt into that, to allow ourselves to truly receive, which is what the bleed, what the menstruality work is doing. And that's what happens at birth, that we receive that oxytocin, having released fully to birth our babies. The same thing at menstruation, each and every month, is that opportunity to completely receive, to allow that mother hug, that hug from our partner if we have one, but that ability to be met in both arcs of the masculine and the feminine. And it is the feminine that we are sorely missing in our earth today, because she isn't honored and she isn't valued and she isn't seen. And when we start to do that in ourselves, then we give our men permission. We give them permission because in many ways, when we don't give ourselves permission, we're pushing them away. We push them away with our anger and our anxiety and our tears, because they don't know how to be with us. And worst of all, if they belittle us and say that we're in, or you're just coming up to that time of the month again,
right,
then the rage just rips right through us, know. And so not knowing how to be with it. So the menstruality work is about educating us to truly deepen into this process of understanding what's happening every month, and more so then the men can feel that in themselves too. And so then, as an example with my own sons now, so 9 and 6, Jacob and Solomon, now when I've now taken to this practice of going down to the bottom of the garden, completely and utterly sleeping and having this time in my pop-up red tent, they've saved up their pocket money and now bought their own pop-up blue tent. And so what has happened in the last couple of months is that they've gone to the other end of the garden on the other side of the house, and they, quote unquote, have chosen to have their sacred time like mummy, which means that they go up to their tent and they go up and sleep, but it also means that they get to read the Beano until late and stay up on the trampoline. But to be in a space where they're completely held and protected by the safety of the garden, and my husband is in the house, our little baby is asleep, Chris gets time to himself, I get time to myself, the older boys get time to themselves, and it seems that everybody wins just by me making that permission to take that time for myself. It's almost as if by making those steps to be with ourselves, we don't know what is going to come from that. We don't know what else will grow. We don't know what else will happen. But what we're doing is taking responsibility for our own needs and then allowing the other people in our lives and in our families and in our immediate surroundings to have permission to take responsibility for themselves. And often, as women, we go to that default setting of taking responsibility for others. And in this practice of menstruality, by removing ourselves in a very beautiful way, we are coming back home to ourselves and therefore allowing that restoration for them also to come back home to their selves. And this dance of the via positiva, via negativa, the masculine and the feminine, the yin and yang forces within each of our bodies has an opportunity to grow and not suppress the other. And because that feminine energy has been suppressed for so long, it is now rising very forcefully and to the point where it can be felt as rage. It can be felt as, or when women meet their menopause, it can be such a force that they leave their families, leave their children, change their career. Everything has to go because it's not been met in the months and the years leading up to it. That then it becomes the change, as it's often termed, in a very impactful way to everybody else around us. And so in order to meet that change in a healthy way, we make those changes in our life as we come up to that change so that we can learn to inhabit our power in a way which serves our community.
Yeah. That is so true. When women go into perimenopause and menopause, it is so feared by both men and women in a different way. Which is why, and I'm not really sure, but I'm guessing that HRT, hormone replacement therapy, was created by a man, or the idea, because HRT is, I think that they meant well with it, but I think that it goes with the misunderstanding or the ignorance, really, of the wisdom of a woman entering into menopause. Because it's kind of like, and I've read so many articles that quite honestly, if you read them, they make a woman in her 50s and 60s sound like, she's died, because it's just like a death sentence. There's no, what's the use for her? She's not, she's not going to have any more babies, and she's getting older, and, what is it? And so there's just such a cultural stigma with that. And
you're true, Marianne, and in many ways she has died. And I've witnessed that in the women in my own family and in my life, because there's a part which hasn't been met. There's a part which can't find that truth speaker in the world. And so therefore it feels easier to shut down. Obviously, it's very painful in order to do that. And what we witness across the rites of passage of the life cycle of a woman. So we witness that medicating after menarche, which is the first rite of passage. We witness that medicating throughout the birthing process, another rite of passage. We witness that medicating across menopause, the third rite of passage. And then when we come to meet our actual physical death, then the pain is taken away by the morphine to be able to, again, not meet that in a conscious way. And so all these 4 opportunities in a woman's life, which again, our ancestors really mark these rites of passage as important gateways, initiations into consciousness awakening within us. And as you say, meaning well, but have been closed down and considered to be the only option. Mm-hmm. Whereas what my work, I feel, is, and what many other women's work in the world and your own work, we all come at it from different perspectives, but is to be able to find a voice for these rites of passage that are happening to everyday women all the way across the world. And yet these seem to be unmet. And when we recognize that they could be us standing in our power, and that we create a community around us that supports us to have that voice in the world, then we start to foster this, bringing back, for want of a better word, but bringing back of this feminine nature, this restoring of our wholeness, this restoring of our ability to be complete women, complete individuals, which are standing within the capacity of our community. And so I feel really passionately about that, because it feels as if it's the only solution when we meet our perimenopause and menopause. And often women feel it's the only solution in birthing their children. And women feel that it's the only solution when they have teenage daughters who they consider are going off the rails, and so therefore are suppressed. And that we have that same suppression happening through each of these 3 major hormonal changes in a woman's life, which, at a very basic level, when we look at what hormones are doing in the body, they're agents of change, and they are awakening us to different levels of consciousness, which if we are supported to grow into, when women meet their menopause, then they've already met those rites of passages to be able to stand in this full elder that we are looking for. We're always looking for teachers. We always seem to be going to the next workshop or to the next leader because we're looking for that leadership in our world. And I really strongly feel that as women reclaiming our cyclical nature, we are becoming those elders. Mm-hmm. We are becoming that next generational voice for our young people, and I hope to inspire them to stand in their power to do the same.
Me too. I'm up for that too. I definitely want. I see so much that I want to stand into. For me, it's like I've only scratched the surface. Now that my children are getting older. I mean, my youngest is 5. And then my son is 8, and then my eldest daughter, she's 11. So yeah, it's only the beginning, and it is such a journey. What I wanted to, when you were speaking, I was thinking about how with all of the controlling that is occurring with the medication and the biochemical suppression and alteration, it's definitely related, in my opinion. And I'm sure that there's going to be studies to refute it and also support it on both sides. All of the chronic illnesses that women experience, whether it's something as well known as breast cancer or ovarian cancer, endometriosis, fibroids, it's no surprise to me that with everything that is occurring in the suppression and opposition of understanding and embracing the menstrual cycle and the wisdom of our bodies, it's no surprise that there's just so many medical chronic illnesses in women.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes, just yes.
Yeah, I mean, there's I'm sure that there's a lot of medical doctors, obstetricians and gynecologists who will refute it and just say, oh, well, breast cancer is definitely not related to the pill, the contraceptive pill. And I think that there are studies they'll say, oh, well, this study says that it's not related to it, and a woman's chance of breast cancer is definitely not increased. if they've taken the pill. But, you know, aside from that, you know, I definitely, with the epidemic of what we're experiencing in infertility, and now women are, so many women that I know have had to undergo IVF. And the more that this problem persists, because it goes around cyclically, the more that this issue persists, and the less impact that you and I as educators have, which I refuse to let that happen, is the more that women will medicate themselves. We will continue to have infertility, and then we will continue to have women who feel that they have no choice but to go through IVF. And then these babies who are conceived through IVF, you know, that's also a questionable part in terms of the health of that embryo and that baby, and when they're born, and you know, I mean, it's all, these are all theories that I have, but it's just,
I've met several women, Marianne, who have experienced IVF and have been on the pill for many years, who have then developed breast cancer. And so, you know, there is no proof that has, you know, that is there. But I'm telling you that I've heard that story many times. And also, one of my teachers, Alexandra Pope, co-authored a book many years ago called The Pill, Are You Sure It's For You? And in that, they investigate the study relating to the menstrual cycle and just showing that it has no proof that it affects your fertility. Yet, if you've been on the pill for a certain amount of years, your cycle never seems to come back to its regularity. Something has happened within the hormonal makeup within a woman's body that has altered it. And so in order to then come back to a normal cycle, you know, however length that might be, but that it is a regular length and not with long periods in between, which, you know, then create this potential for infertility, that definitely happens, whether it's proven or not. There are hundreds of women that I've met that have experienced difficulties in conceiving, and then perhaps have conceived naturally, but then find it very difficult to have another child. And we don't fully understand the hormonal system of the body. We know that the hormonal system of the body is linked to the endocrine system. We know the endocrine system is linked to the energy system. And so to mess with that, to use medications which alter the hormonal system, we're affecting our energy system by doing that. And I think that this is not understood by most of us that choose to take this medication, because it's the after effects which have the long-term implications. And of course, they're not discussed when the medication is given.
Yeah. Well, wow, I could go on. We could go on and on about this, couldn't we?
Absolutely.
Mandy, you have shared so many bits of wisdom. Just share how people can find you, contact you if they want to send you an email or anything like that.
So I can be reached through my website. It's www.mandyadams.co.uk. I can be sent an email to mandy@mandyadams.co.uk. And the work that I offer is primarily for women that are not in Cornwall. It's menstruality mentoring sessions. And so I offer Skype sessions, which can be taken individually or as a set of 4 throughout your monthly cycle. And those I operate over Skype or through telephone. I also offer rites of passage ceremonies, which are also through Skype for women that are not in Cornwall. And that is meeting and restoring what it was for us at our menarche. And that's 2 Skype sessions over 2 monthly cycles of the woman. And restoring motherhood and what that would have looked like and how it can be restored, whether we have children or not, in order to stand into the warrior energy of what a mother truly is. And then also the croning ceremony or the wise woman ceremony. So meeting how we were met or how we are meeting our perimenopause and our menopause to be able to stand in this truth-speaking role that the world so sorely is asking us to do. And also then you can travel to Cornwall and you can see me here for my workshops. I offer women's wellbeing workshops twice a year. One of them is called Menstrual Cycle as Women's Medicine, and the other one, that's on this Sunday, and the other one in December is called Menstrual Cycle as Women's Spiritual Practice. I offer 4 other workshops as well called Restoring Woman, and that's taking us into the 4 archetypes of a woman's cycle, also here in Cornwall. And I also offer Well Woman yoga classes on a Tuesday night here in Cornwall, and pregnancy yoga classes.
Oh, that's great. That's so great. Yeah, you have the one that's coming up in 2 days. So, and you have that once a year or throughout the year.
Yeah, there's two parts to that workshop that can be standalone or 2 together. This Sunday's workshop is about understanding the mechanics of the menstrual cycle in collaboration with a fellow yoga teacher, so that I teach the menstrual cycle literacy teachings, and then we embody that in a practice and understand how we can use those practices for different parts of our menstrual cycle. The workshop that I'm offering in December then is specifically about menstruation and understanding the different states of consciousness, which we haven't spoken about. That's another podcast. That we meet at menstruation. So we meet 5 different states of consciousness, and each runs into the other in order to awaken this oxytocin, or this mother hug that we can experience at menstruation. That's what that workshop is about, and that's also in collaboration with Lucinda, so we can embody that and meet our menstruation in a unhurried and gentle way.
Great. Awesome. This has been so enlightening, and it is one of my favorite topics to talk about, especially with someone who's as passionate or more passionate than me. And I've learned so much just from this conversation and meeting you. I love that we've connected. So thank you for your wisdom and your passion and your dedication, and also your time for being with me here.
Thank you for asking me, Marianne. It's a real pleasure to talk to you and to meet a fellow woman who is passionate about their own work. And I feel that the more and more of us that stand in the calling of what we love, what we feel drawn to, then there'll be more of these conversations. And so I'm really grateful for you for asking me to speak and for standing in the work that you run as well.
Thank you. Wow. Come on. Have you ever thought about or even learned about the menstrual cycle this way? I am in love with this episode, and if you felt even half as moved as I was, you need to not only listen to it again, you have to share this with everyone you know, especially mothers, so we can all teach our daughters and sons about this. If you love this episode and would like more information, please reach out to Mandy Adams. She'd love to hear from you. All the links are in the show notes. Also, please spread the love, spread the info, subscribe to my podcast, and please write a review. Check out my website, yourdoinggreatmom.com, for more information, my new conversation forum, and to sign up to my email list to join my group of moms and women from all over. You don't want to miss next week's episode, where I sit down with my husband and talk about this episode as he dissects the information discussed. He'll be able to translate this in, shall we say, man speak. I am sure you will find it funny and entertaining. Thanks again for listening. See you next week.